Okay, good afternoon. I'm Dean Jessica Berg, and I would like to welcome you to our webinar today. It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Aisha Hardaway, who is the director of our Social Justice Law Center, which is hosting this particular lecture, and she will introduce our distinguished speaker.
Thank you, Dean Berg. Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for the Dr. Maya Angelou and Professor Calvin Sharp Distinguished Interdisciplinary Endowment Lecture on Peaceful Conflict. This lecture has traditionally been held on or around April 4th in each year in honor of Maya Angelou's birthday and to never forget the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. The pandemic delayed this lecture earlier this year, but we're here today and grateful for that, as well as our speakers' flexibility. Dr. Javi Morheim is a professor in the College of Medicine at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center. She does clinical teaching, consulting, and writing with special interest in healthcare's changing economics, conflict resolution, and the litigation issues surrounding clinical medical research. Dr. Morheim is an active Tennessee Supreme Court listed mediator for disputes in both civil and family matters. She's a licensed attorney, assisting clients pro bono in selected cases, and representing clients successfully before the Tennessee Court of Appeals. Dr. Morheim received her PhD in philosophy from the University of Virginia and her JD, magna cum laude, from the University of Memphis. She's authored 2 books and over 180 articles in journals of law, medicine, and bioethics. Her 2 books, Balancing Act, The New Medical Ethics of Medicine, New Economics, and her second book, Holding Healthcare Accountable, Law and the New Medical Marketplace. Dr. Morheim has presented hundreds of invited lectures nationally and internationally, and we're delighted to have her here with us today. I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Morheim. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm going to start screen sharing because rock and roll, let's get to the PowerPoints and hope that things work properly. Are you seeing, there we go. Does that look good? All right. This is here in Memphis, Tennessee. There's a special connection between this lectureship and Memphis, Tennessee, because as pretty much all of you know, on April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated here in Memphis on that date. And the National Civil Rights Museum is located here in Memphis. Of course, it surrounds the Lorraine Motel where that terrible, tragic accident, not accident, but assassination happened. So one of the things that the city of Memphis was looking to do all along was to rename some parks that were named after Confederate symbolism and so forth, and to remove statues of Jefferson Davis and Nathan Bedford Forrest. And this was happening as we were moving toward the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination. And so it was important to the city to move those statues. So this is the story of that removal. And frankly, it is an amazing story about brilliant lawyering, okay? That's what I love about this story. And so, oh dear. There we go. All right, I'm just gonna have to move it this way. These are the 5 brilliant lawyers that I'm going to be talking about today. And I'm gonna introduce each one of them in turn as you see their role come up. And so we begin the story. There are actually 2 stories. And this is the first one. Once upon a time in a land far away, namely Memphis is far from Cleveland, there were 3 little parks. One of them was Jefferson Davis Park. That's the park that did not have a statue of Jefferson Davis. And then we had Confederate Park and Forest Park, which is where Nathan Bedford Forrest not only had a large equestrian statue, it is to this day where he and his wife are buried. Confederate Park is where the statue of Jefferson Davis was. Okay, this was that statue. He actually lived in Memphis for about 9 years following the Civil War. The statue went up in 1964, and you can note that two things were afoot in 1964. It was the centennial of the end of the Civil War, but it was also, more importantly, the Civil Rights Act, followed by, and of course, at that time, the Voting Rights Act was very much active in Congress at the same time. This is a closer view of the Jeff Davis statue. Then we look at Nathan Bedford Forrest. A lot of people do not realize. They know that he started or was instrumental in starting the Ku Klux Klan. Some of them are familiar with other things. He was, of course, a Civil War general. What a lot of people don't know was that he made his fortune in the slave trade. This is one of his advertisements. Forrest and Maple, slave dealers, 87 Adams Street. Negroes sold on commission in addition to directly. Highest market price for good stock. It's chilling to read this ad. Their jail is complete, containing 300, and for comfort, neatness, and safety, best of any in the Union. If you want to examine your stock before purchasing elsewhere, you are invited to do so. This is something else that Forrest is known for. On April 12th of 1864, a large group of African-American troops surrendered to the Union, and nevertheless, Forrest basically massacred the men after they surrendered. And he is known for this as well. And in 1865, started the KKK in Pulaski. He was the first Grand Wizard. So here's what we have going on for action regarding the statue. Hang on one sec. How do I reverse this puppy? There we go. So at any rate, all right. I'm having a little bit of a challenge because all yeah, here we go. Yes. So how did the statue come to be? The directors way back in 1898 decided, let's build a statue, a nice equestrian statue in memory and honor of Forrest. And they engaged an internationally acclaimed sculptor whose wife happened to be a Memphian. And okay, Mr. Niehaus, make us a miniature, and if we like it and approve it, we will pay you $25,000 to have this statue made. They got the model, they approved it. This was actually cast at a very famous foundry in Paris. The statue was then shipped by steamer to New York, and then to Savannah, and then by rail to Memphis, arriving in April of 1905. And before the dedication of the statue, he was originally, and his wife, were originally buried in a very large, very historic cemetery here in Memphis, where he had wanted to be buried, Elmwood Cemetery. But they disinterred him and moved him to what became Forest Park. And part of the transit was this is from April of 1905. They're saying, well, the monument should arrive in the city this morning if the Frisco, if it doesn't wreck between Birmingham and Memphis. Apparently the travels of the statue were kind of a mess because the height of the statue made it impossible to get under quite a few bridges. So now we have, this is the photograph from May 16th of 1905, where they unveiled the statue, a great hue and cry of joy and delight from the people who were gathered there. And this is what it looked like. It is, and is to this day, even though it's not still sitting there, it is the fourth largest equestrian statue in the world. It is a piece of art, as is often acknowledged by regarding a lot of the statues that have been taken down, moved here and there around the country. And this is what it looked like when, for almost all the time I've lived here in Memphis. So renaming the parks is the first story. So we have these three parks. And this one was called Forest Park. Sons of Confederate veterans installed a marker in May of 2012. Big old thing, 10.5 feet by 1.5 feet tall. They've raised the money. They said, well, we want to help tourists who are interested in the Civil War to find this park and know that they've got the right place. Oh, so quietly, less than a year later, the city just got rid of the marker. They didn't want that there. They didn't want these parks named that. They didn't want markers. They did not want to celebrate this part of the Confederacy, at least the majority of the city. So, all right, in February 4th of 2013, a bill was filed in the legislature, just a bill at this stage, the Tennessee Heritage Protection Act of 2013, to limit the authority of governing bodies to rename parks that are named for or dedicated to any military figure or event. Well, guess what? Next day, City Council, okay, we're going to rename these guys before anything else happens to that bill. So they renamed Forest Park the exciting name of Health Sciences Park. This was in the heart of UT, University of Tennessee Health Sciences Center. That's my employer. That's where I get my paycheck and where I go to work every day, or work from home, as the current case may be. Confederate Park became Memphis Park. Jeff Davis Park became Mississippi River Park. So far, so good. Now, think any of the students, and I'm going to aim a lot of this talk at the students because, and I'm going to kind of cut to the chase, students, a great deal of the stories I'm telling today have to do with the beauty of being a wonk, a lawyer wonk, okay? Understanding regs, understanding process, read your civil procedures, study it well, it really matters. So here's the question. Why was this done fast and by a resolution of the City Council, not by an ordinance? Well, I don't expect you to know enough about Tennessee and Memphis law to be able to answer that. The answer is this, hang on one sec. The answer is that an ordinance requires 3 separate readings. So there's lots of time to file a lawsuit somewhere in the middle of there and say, stop this nonsense, we want to drag this out, at which point the legislation would have been enacted, as it later was, pretty quickly. A resolution is something that could be done right on the spot. Boom, done, names were changed. So this is brilliant lawyer number 1. He is A.C. Horton. He was the mayor at the time. He was famed for his absolutely dapper clothing, double-breasted pinstripes. And I have to tell a slight story to the side because when A.C. Horton was mayor here in Memphis, he was the first mayor who took seriously the idea that it's a good thing for a city to have bicycle paths, bike lanes, walking trails, things like that. And so during his time as mayor, a whole lot of bike paths, were built or marked off in traffic lanes and so forth. The cyclist community was absolutely thrilled. And so I assured AC on many occasions that he absolutely had the spandex vote locked up. We ran into him one Sunday morning on my Sunday morning cycle ride. I am to his immediate left. Of course, we had to get a photo op. So there is AC Horton outside the Starbucks with my spandex vote gang. This is brilliant lawyer number 2, Alan Wade, who was the city attorney at the time. So, okay, they renamed the parks and the Sons of Confederate Veterans immediately filed suit. This is a terrible thing you did. So to the law students, and I have to confess, guys, I have not been a lawyer all that long. I entered law school at the tender age of 55, okay? I swear, I'm going to buy, and I have to do it. I really do. I've sworn for a long time. I need to purchase for the law school reading room. They have a lovely reading room right on the banks of the Mississippi River, overlooking the river. And I need to buy a rocking chair. And it will be the Geezer endowed chair for all the students, but only the oldest student in class to use. Aisha, is that a good plan? Thumbs up? Okay, the Geezer chair for the oldest student in the class. Now, one thing I learned in law school is read the rules. It is astonishing what you will find there. Be a rules wonk and you will be ahead of just about everybody else. So here's what they were fighting about. Oh my goodness, yes, rules wonks. Does the city charter actually say what is the process for renaming a chart? Does the ordinance supersede the charter? Does this require a 3-read ordinance or just the 1-read resolution? Does Charter Section 579.1 actually supersede Charter Section 581? What is the meaning of permanent? Into the weeds, motion after motion, leading to, of course, motion sickness for one and all. All right, so here's kind of roughly quickly what happened. May 29th of 2013, they file a complaint in Chancery Court. And by the way, Here in Tennessee, we actually have a separate court of equity, is Chancery Court. Law students, Civ Pro, separate from our circuit courts, which are courts of law. Chancery and circuit courts really both do issues of both equity and law, but Chancery Court tends to take over most of the equity issues. And this was mainly about injunctions and things like that. So it went to Chancery. All right. So Sons of Confederate Veterans, that's the SCV right here, files a complaint for renaming the parks. And gosh, you took away our very expensive, lovely, lovely markers. Shame on you. So then they filed a second amended complaint and motion to dismiss the second amended complaint, and then back and forth with motions and motions. Then we have from the Tennessee Court of Appeals, ultimately, Hayes versus City of Memphis, then said this was issues of standing. Who gets to sue? Because as there were various motions and remotions and amended complaints, they kept the SCV kept adding folks, including great grandsons of Nathan Bedford Forrest and some other folks. Finally, the Court of Appeals said, you know, the only ones who have standing are Sons of Confederate Veterans. Okay, back to court you go. And Chancery Court, City won on all issues. By now, we're already in 2016. These things take time. Get used to it. It takes time. So by June of 2016, now they're appealing again. Okay, so motions for summary judgment, motions to dismiss, more summary judgment, this and that and this and that. Responsive defendant to plaintiff's motion for summary judgment, back and forth and back and forth. Finally, Tennessee Court of Appeals, and this is in 2017. And most of the important things in my next story happened in mid and late 2017, and you'll know that later. Court of Appeals upheld the February 24th, 2017 Chancery Court order granting Memphis summary judgment for all of it. Yes, renaming the parks was okay. Sons of Confederate Veterans lost on everything. Okay, now, from renaming the parks, that's a done deal, to removing the statues. Now it's going to get complicated. Back to read the rules. And there are some amazing little gems buried in those rules that if we hadn't read the rules, if the brilliant lawyers had not read the rules, things would have worked out very differently. So now our cast of characters and a very important statute. This is the thing that was passed. Remember that bill was introduced one day before the city council renamed the parks. And here are a couple of things in the Heritage Protection Act of 2013. It was broadened in 2016. And it says, no statue, monument, memorial, in honor of major American military conflict or figure, and is located on public property. It may not be removed, relocated, altered, renamed, or otherwise disturbed. Then we have the second part, no statue, monument, or park, or preserve, reserve, which is erected for, named in honor of any historic military figure or military event, yada, 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 and is located on public property, may be renamed or rededicated. That was the bill. It became law. That's why City Council acted quickly. So that's the thing. It created something called, oops, there we go. I'm going to back up here. It created the Tennessee Historic Preservation Council, or the Historic Council. Brilliant lawyer number 3. This guy, Jim Strickland, became mayor at the beginning of 2016. Also a lawyer, very well reputed lawyer in town. And Strickland, remember, we are now moving toward, there's been a strong feeling in the city. We need to get these statues out of here. We're moving toward MLK 50, the 50th anniversary of King's assassination. And Mayor Strickland kept saying, we are going to remove these statues, but we're going to do it legally. We're not going to do it dead of night, yank it out and run like heck out of town. Okay, we're going to do it legally. And I will tell you right now, there are a lot of arched eyebrows and rolling eyes, okay? You have to understand, Memphis is a city that is 2/3 African-American. Note who they elected mayor, and by the way, who recently was re-elected for his second and final term under term limits. But like I say, there are a lot of eyes being rolled here. Okay, yeah, sure. He'll go through the motion, say, oh gosh, we tried. Well, too bad. And a lot of people thought that. Little did they know what was cooking very far behind the scenes. So, okay, we've got the Heritage Protection Act established, and they created the Historical Commission. And it empowered, now generally this act flat out forbade moving or renaming or getting rid of statues, names of parks, forbade all of it. But they did create the Historical Commission that could grant a waiver to an otherwise prohibitive removal, renaming, whatever. Okay, so just kind of keep track of this. August of 15, and no, students, there will not be a quiz on these dates. I absolutely promise, no quizzes. They adopted Ordinance 5592 in support of removing the Nathan Bedford Forrest statue. Okay, and that was before Jim Strickland became mayor. Shortly after, okay, let's get on it. We're going to do this legally. We petitioned the Tennessee Historical Commission. Please, please, please say, yes, we want to remove the statue. And of course, in 2016, no, you may not remove the statue. Now, I'm going to take you, all right, to some video. And it's important to understand what was going on. This is October, mid-October, 21, I believe, of 2016. Jim Strickland is talking to the Tennessee Historical Commission, all right, telling them why. And for people who are skeptical about, well, come on, these are just historical things. They were erected to memorialize history, yada, yada. As he points out, and as you will hear Mayor Strickland say, it's important to see what was in the newspapers at the time and what it was understood to be the purpose and the benefit of the statue at the time. And he reads from the newspapers from 1905. Come on.
It was not placed in this park immediately after the war. It was not even a battle site during the war. It was placed there 40 years after the Civil War, just as Jim Crow laws began being enacted in Memphis and in Tennessee and across the South. The Memphis News-Sentinel, shortly after the installation in 1905, ran an article. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like permission to pass this out to all the members. Pass it. It's entitled Forest Again in White Shroud. It depicts the Forrest statue draped in a white sheet with 9 white-robed horsemen around it. Let me just read you a quote. Stalwart, strong, and invincible. He sits erect on King Philip, overlooking Forest Park and turning his eagle eye toward the south, just as he was wont to do 40 years ago, when chaotic conditions of life required the organizing of the Ku Klux Klan for the protection and independence of Southern social conditions. What were those Southern social conditions? They were Jim Crow laws, mandating legal segregation. They were passed in all Southern states, including Tennessee. For example, when this statue was erected in 1905, streetcar customers in Memphis were just getting used to a new law passed in the state that required people of different races to be separated in different cars. And just a few months after this statue was erected, Mr. Luther Billings, an African American, was lynched. One of a dozen lynchings in Shelby County in 13 years. Those were the social conditions. And the park at which this statue was placed was a common route for African Americans to travel to and from work, ensuring that Forrest would be ever present, and so would the cause of Jim Crow. Simply put, this is a monument to Jim Crow. And we know that simply by reading what was stated at the time. An account from the commercial appeal the day after the dedication summed it up well. He sits, the more supreme in saddle, to exercise an unconscious influence among the people who so honored him yesterday. And then the article I pass out to you. For the protection of the honor and the independence of social Southern conditions. Today, we know that to be segregation. Today, we call it what it is, white supremacy.
So that was the mayor when he was on the very first petition to the Tennessee Historical Commission. Another little side note here. Now that was in October of 2017. As you can imagine, there were a lot of folks in the city interested in helping the process of taking these statues down. And this is Tammy Sawyer, who later became elected to public office. And the group was called Take 'em Down 901. The 901 part is simply our phone area code. But 901 actually is broader here in Memphis. Our the soccer team is called the 901 Football Club. Every year on September 1st, it is 901 Day. Okay, so people promote Memphis businesses. And so 901 is kind of a number that's in play here, foreshadowing some things here. So the Tennessee Historical Commission denied that. And so now they file a petition challenging the criteria that the Historic Commission used for this denial of the city's request for a waiver. I mean, this stuff just keeps going and going and going back and forth and back and forth. Now, all right, we're going to leave that on the table. We're going to go someplace else right now. Totally different place. Meanwhile, back at the ranch on another front, the city council was thinking, we've got a lot of these little pocket parks, maybe a block here or a half a block there, even a quarter of a block over there. It's very expensive. It's expensive to maintain these. It's cumbersome to maintain all of these, so here we are in August of 2017, the first reading, second and third reading of a city ordinance that allows selling city property for a nonprofit for a nominal value, but only under certain conditions. And read the rules. Tennessee Code Annotated allows this. A municipality can sell, they don't have to have necessarily a reason. They can sell to a not-for-profit corporation any land and existing buildings thereon for, some nominal sum if it's in the interests of the municipality. And good old 123501, upon a majority vote, they can engage in disposal of real or personal property by private negotiation, and sale, where number one, the property has significance for, say, historical associations. And number two, the real or personal property is sold to a nonprofit corporation that's going to preserve, as a city park, as a nice little pocket park. They'll still leave it open to the public, and there has to be a preservation or conservation agreement in the deed. So you can sell these little pocket parks to a nonprofit entity. And then this is brilliant attorney number 4, Bruce McMullen, who at the time was city attorney, also with Baker Donaldson, a major international law firm with a large presence here in Memphis. Brilliant lawyer number 5 is Van Turner, an attorney, but also he is on the county commission. I might note here in Memphis, we have 2 separate governments, city and county. So he's with the county. Jim Strickland, Mayor Horton, they were city governance. Okay. And he is a county commissioner. Of note, Van Turner's father lived in Memphis all his life. He was one of those folks Strickland mentioned who often had to walk through Forest Park to get to work, get home from work. And he was forbidden by law to sit on a bench in Forest Park. And anytime Van Turner's dad wanted to walk through that park, surprise, surprise, a white guy would be an impromptu escort. escorting him through and out of the park. Kind of a quick surveillance going on. So here's Bruce McMullen and Van Turner, and who should chance upon whom? They saw each other at the Grizz. You guys have your very nice Cavaliers. We got the Grizz, okay? And it's a lot of folks, you know, they do business on the golf course. Here in Memphis, a whole lot of business gets done at the Grizz games, okay? When we're not in a pandemic. So Bruce McMullen approaches Van Turner at the Grizz game and says, "Hey, Van, you interested in maybe helping us out on a little something we got going here?" And Van says, "Talk to me." And they have a conversation. And funniest thing, Van gets going with Memphis Green Space. What is it? It's a Tennessee not-for-profit corporation to serve as an independent nonprofit, providing what? Park-based recreation within the city to strengthen and support neighborhood and community involvement. You know exactly where this is going at this point. Just putting building blocks in place, one after the next, use the statutes, read the rules. We now have a lovely not-for-profit organization dedicated to parks and preservation of open green spaces. Back to the statutes. So now, okay, and back to the, okay, we're getting wonky again. So after they denied, and this is almost exactly a year after, you know, that video clip of Jim Strickland talking to the Historical Commission. And so now they're filing another waiver petition with the Historical Commission, trying to get them to recognize that they used invalid criteria and trying to get them. Well, guess what? The commission denied the waiver petition. And at this point, they were requesting appointment of an administrative law judge to give an opinion on the city's petition for declaratory order. There is a whole lot of wonkiness going on here, guys. This is how law happens, students. It's how law happens and how legal process happens in matters of this type. So we got a hearing set for November, just a month later in 2017, postponed to December, and then eventually it got postponed further. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, in December of 2017, Memphis filed a petition in Davidson County. Now that's in the Nashville area. Chancery Court, remember that's a court of equity, to appeal the next denial that they got a second denial of the waiver petition. Meanwhile, back at City Council, okay, things are going on in various places. City Council is busy. They have two ordinances. The first one is calling for the city attorney, which at this point was Bruce McMullen, to work with the administration to develop a plan and submit the plan to the council for removal or relocation of the statutes from city-owned property. Second reading, third reading, signed, boom, November of 2017. And the next month, okay, after this initial one in October of 2017, first reading of another ordinance asking for immediate removal of the Forest Equestrian statue and the Jeff Davis statue. We want this down immediately, but this is an ordinance, first reading in October, second reading in November of 2017, third reading, December 20th, 2017 was the third reading. This is the one for immediate removal. It was the third one. It passed on the third reading. Strickland signs. Parks immediately after that were sold to Memphis Green Space. They didn't sell the statues, they sold the parks. Question for the students, and if you want to throw this up into the Q&A, here's a question for you. This was done at the end of the day. Why do you suppose this was done at the end of the day? Anybody want to venture a guess? I'm looking at Q&A. Not seeing a guess. Well, I will cut to the chase. It was done at the end of the day because no time for anyone to file an injunction. And what else happened on December 20th, 2017 at the very end of the day? He signed it. There's Van Turner to his left. Okay, they sign it. This is Jim Strickland's tweet showing the signing. This is the bill of sale for those properties. All three parks got sold to Memphis Green Space. And what happened? Before the ink was dry, police immediately blocked off city streets, brought in the cranes. They were already poised, ready to go. And all of a sudden, wall-to-wall coverage on every, this is going to happen. How they kept this as quiet as it was, as long as it was, is kind of almost a mystery here. But I was glued to the TV. Probably every Memphian who had a TV was glued to one or another of these stations. It was dark, but it was only, come on, it's December 20th. It was, of course it was dark. It was early evening. And as we watched, here's the next question. Police blocked off the city streets. Aside from, of course, squad cars, what other vehicles were used to block off traffic so that the cranes could come in and work with these statues? What other vehicles? Memphis city sanitation trucks. The poetry, many of you, if not all of you, know very well why Martin Luther King was in Memphis. It was the city sanitation workers' strike. He came in March before, the April visit. And it's important, many of you may not realize some of the things that triggered the sanitation workers' strike. This was a huge trigger. The working conditions for the African Americans were horrible, but a very important spark to that strike. It was in February, cold Memphis day. It was a thunderstorm. There was thunder, there was lightning. Of course, the African American sanitation workers were not allowed to get into the cab of the truck for safety and for comfort. The white guys got in, but even if the cab was otherwise empty except for the driver, the black workers could not get in. They took shelter as best they could in the back of the truck. Somehow by accident, the mechanism of the sanitation truck was triggered and 2 men were crushed to death in that sanitation truck. And that helped trigger the sanitation workers truck. This truck, by the way, is in the National Civil Rights Museum. And this is the type of truck that was there. So using sanitation trucks to block off city streets, there is poetry. There is poetry. It is not the only poetry, as you will see. This is Dr. King present. And I will tell you, lawyers and future lawyers, another important piece of good lawyering was some of my friends who are still alive, who as young lawyers helped to fight in court the injunction against the march at that time. And the story of that is a wonderful and extraordinary story that has been written up. And Aisha, remind me, and I can shoot you a copy by email of the story because it's pretty remarkable. So now, all right, here's another question. I love this one. All right, who can tell me to the minute, when did old Nathan come off his pedestal? Think about something I said a moment ago. When did old Nathan come off? 9:01. Can we talk poetry here? But I'll tell you, that was not intended, okay? And I talked to Bruce McMillan about this. They started the work at about 7 o'clock in the evening. The crane firm was actually, as he put it, the third string. The first 2 crane companies found out what the job was, said, oh no, and they backed out. So this was the third crane company. They were not as big, they were not as experienced. And so they come in, they get the straps under the horse's belly, and they pull, and he ain't coming off. And the people who are most intimately involved in this are thinking, oh dear, this is a 100-plus-year-old statue. And they were praying to whatever they could pray to that this is not going to shatter into 1,000 pieces. And I remember watching the TV saying, well, they're trying to lift, it's not coming off. Well, they're loosening the straps and we're sitting there just watching. And of course, the reporters, the anchors are desperately fishing for things to say. They're interviewing this guy, they're interviewing that guy, okay. And so then, okay, things going on, we don't know what's going on. Remember, this is a little after 7, okay? And then a little bit later on in the evening, maybe an hour later, you see another attempt at the hoist. And it looks like it's loose now. Let me put it back down. And now Well, I don't know why they're waiting. At that point, they were waiting for 9:01. And at exactly 9:01, old Nathan hoisted off his pedestal. And that's what it looked like. This is Tammy Sawyer, who has since been elected to public office. She headed up Take Him Down 901. This date was the 74th birthday of Van Turner's father, and he lived to see it. He died shortly thereafter, but he lived to see this, which is another bit of poetry in this whole thing, which is pretty remarkable. This is what it looks like today. Nathan Bedford Forrest and his wife are still interred there, and that will probably change. Some further follow-up, however, this story, of course, does not end there. The first challenge was, wait a minute, how did this happen so fast? And so they appealed, the Sons of Confederate Veterans appealed to the Tennessee Comptroller. Did this comply with Tennessee Open Meetings Act? Why, yes, said the Comptroller the following February. And the next litigation they filed in Davidson County, again, that's near Nashville, Chancery Court. Shame, shame, this is terrible. You gotta undo this whole thing. And so there was a temporary injunction barring Memphis Green, say you can't sell these statues, you can't destroy them, gift them, move them, just leave them where they are. There were both, and Jeff Davis came out later that evening, and there was also a bust of another Confederate figure, Mathis, Forrest Davis and Mathis. They have been kept in an undisclosed location, secure. Nobody was ever interested in damage or destroying these artworks because they are. The Jeff Davis statue really is not a splendid piece of art, but as art, the statue of Forrest is a serious piece of sculpture. So, okay, now you get into the next year in January, early January, late January, I guess. They ordered them into mediation, and not surprisingly, mediation did not work. Ultimately, it went to trial that May, found that the Confederate veterans could not prevail because the Tennessee Heritage Protection Act only applies to public property. Read the rules on public property. Furthermore, they didn't prohibit the sale or transfer of property that where you have a legal and valid conveyance under Tennessee Code annotated 122302. So then they appealed. Okay, and it raised several different kinds of issues. And so then it went to the Tennessee Court of Appeal on June 4th of 2019, barely over a year ago, affirming the judgment of the trial court. The city of Memphis wins on all counts. Trial court's stay pending appeal is now dissolved. And so the costs of appeal were assessed to the Sons of Confederate Veterans. And cert was denied barely over a year ago. This is October 22. This was October 14, 1 year ago. Tennessee Supreme Court denied cert. That was the end of the litigation. And so now, just last December, now that we've got final word from the Tennessee Supreme Court, it is over, and very quietly, the Memphis Green Space transferred custody of the statues to the Sons of Confederate Veterans, confidential terms. One term that is not confidential: these statues may never, ever, ever again be in Shelby County, which is the county in which Memphis, of course, is located. Forrest and his wife, as I say, remain interred in this park. Green Space owes the land, but they cannot relinquish custody of the remains. You got to get court, Forrest, descendants, other kinds of legal process have to happen. The Sons of Confederate Veterans prefer that the remains be with the statue, and they will probably initiate proceedings so that Forrest can be disinterred. A related issue, it never ends, guys. You know this, it never ends. In the Tennessee state capitol, there is a bust of Nathan Bedford Forrest. This news clip is from October of 1980, and you see the Klan in their white robes saying, isn't this, Forrest appropriately overseeing a meeting of the Klan? Here it is, a contemporary photo. Recent efforts are now to send, guess to whom? The Tennessee Historical Commission. Can we move it? And the governor actually is recommending, yes, let's remove this from the Capitol. Nathan Bedford Forrest is still a bust in the Tennessee Capitol. The latest, and this just from a few days ago, the Historical Commission will be hearing public comments ahead of next year's vote. The vote can't happen until 2021. You can see this is still a live issue. Here again are 5 brilliant lawyers, and I invite questions and comments. Aisha, I turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. If you'll stop sharing your screen, that would be
Got
great.
it. If I can do that, hang on. Oh, wait, I know. I have to move the little pictures of you guys in order to stop sharing my, come here. There we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
Awesome. Thank you so much for such an energetic and absolutely informative presentation. One of the comments I just have to tell you says, oh boy, this is an excellent presentation. So if you didn't see that, I wanted to make sure that you did. I think I'm gonna, one of the earlier questions that we had was, why did the city do an ordinance in August of 2015 and not a resolution like they had done earlier? To avoid the readings.
Great question. I am not sufficiently a city charter wonk. My guess is that is the type of thing that would require an ordinance and 3 hearings and so forth. The reason that a resolution was acceptable was very specifically because of an ordinance change that created the City Parks Commission that expressly allowed, the mayor could have changed the names all by himself. A.C. Horton could have done that alone. He said, you know, I'd like to get the endorsement of the city council. I'd rather not fly solo on this. That's why he brought it to the council to do it also by a resolution from them. He didn't even have to do that by virtue of the ordinance that created the City Parks Commission. And I may have the name of that wrong, City Parks Commission, whatever, but that's why that was able to be done by resolution.
Okay, thank you so
Great
much.
question.
Yeah, another questioner asked basically, what evidence do we have to know that Nathan Bedford Forrest indeed founded the KKK? Do you have any more, as a Memphian, do you have any more information on the origins of his connection to that?
Another good question. I did not delve into that corner. I believe he was the first Grand Wizard. He was not alone in founding the KKK, however. And there are some stories that one hears that he, you know, as the Klan turned into something pretty ugly. And Ulysses Grant, during his presidency, clamped down on the Klan quite aggressively and for a while successfully, and then the Klan reemerged. There are stories that Forrest regretted some of the turns the Klan later took. I do not know if those stories are correct or if they are revisionist. I simply do not know.
Okay, and then on Forrest, a related question: do you know if his descendants expressed any opinions on the removal of the statue, and if so, what those opinions were? The questioner notes that Judge Taney's descendants approved of his statues coming down and expressed shame at him. So
interesting. Yes, actually, when in the earliest bits of litigation, in the renaming of the parks, Forrest's grandchildren did join in that suit. In like, it was maybe the second amended complaint, started out just the Sons of Confederate Veterans. They later joined the suit trying to resist renaming Forest Park. I do not have further information about their attitudes toward, say, his fortune he earned as a slave trade, the massacre of up at Fort Pillow of the Black troops. I do not have their opinions on that. I do know that early on, it was determined by the Tennessee Court of Appeal that they did not have standing. Mm-hmm. So they were removed from the litigation regarding renaming the parks. Mm-hmm. But they have standing clearly when it comes to disinterring and removing the Forrest and his wife's remains.
Yeah. Do you happen to have an opinion on whether or not the Sons of the Confederate could purchase a private park and reinstall the monument within a private park in Shelby County.
Nowhere in Shelby County, like period, end of story. It doesn't matter. The agreement is those statues will, and I'm presuming that they are in some secure place that is not in Shelby County currently. They must never cross the border into Shelby County again, period, end of story. Private, public, no place.
And that was the agreement of that was the settlement after the Supreme Court declined to certiorari. Yeah.
And that was within the agreement whereby Memphis Green Space said to the Sons of Confederate veterans, here, you can have them. We give them to you. I do not know if any serious money was exchanged for that. My sense is that probably not a significant amount, if any. I do not know. The terms are undisclosed.
Okay. Well, I don't know if others, let's see. Do you see this icon monument removal effort spreading to statues of our founding fathers, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, etc., who, after all, bought and sold slaves?
This is such an important question. And my first answer is darn if I know. I mean, I think it is important to understand context and intent. In the case of the founding, there were fathers, not a whole lot of mothers involved there. In the case of the founding fathers, the institution of slavery was so much a part of the fabric, at that time, not terribly much questioned, not widely questioned, shall we say, that it's harder to judge them in the same way we would judge people for whom the question has been very actively raised. That said, I'm not sure how far I buy that reasoning either, but it's also important to recognize the important contributions of those founding fathers in creating a system that could later recognize the humanity of people whose humanity was denied for so long. I would love to hear others' thoughts on that, frankly. Aisha, you have thoughts to offer. I would welcome your thoughts as well, because it's a conversation.
Yeah, it is a conversation, and I think a big part of how we get to the place of discussing and evaluating the purpose and the presence of relics to the old day, and as the mayor in Memphis so clearly outlined, right, that this was specifically done at a time related to Jim Crow, and that lynchings were connected to the erecting of the statutes. And in some ways, I think that is a that is a specific form of intimidation, right, related to domestic terrorism. Something quite different, though, maybe with the founding fathers in some respects, but I will say that a lot of this could likely be resolved with a simple sort of recognition and acknowledgement of the history of this country that is very well put out there. There's so much debate even now as to whether or not we should be talking about the fact that our founding fathers were connected to and deeply committed to, right, enslavement in this country. And so I think if we could start to have real conversations around that, we wouldn't get maybe necessarily to the statues, or maybe the statues that would take care of the question around the statues, but we haven't really begun to have real honest conversations about it. So
yeah. I think you're spot on pointing out the intent surrounding the erection of these statues. If they had been erected immediately after the war, I think it would be a significantly different conversation. But Tennessee was one of, if not the first state to enact Jim Crow laws, and what were before that called the race laws, that created crimes for being Black, for doing things while Black. And I think that context and intent matters enormously in this.
Yeah. While being Black in what was supposed to be a free country, right? Where the statute, someone asked really quickly if you know where the statutes are going. I think I know the answer to that, but
It is not disclosed at this time. I would imagine the sons of Confederate veterans who now have full custody of them are engaged in decision making and perhaps conversations within themselves as to how best to honor those they wish to honor. You know, they could put it in somebody's backyard if they want. It's up to them.
Yeah. And then another thing, I think we know the Sons of the Confederate or the group, they paid for the cost of the appeal, right? I thought I heard you say that.
Yes, they lost the suit. They had to pay the court costs, their own legal costs and so forth, but they had to pay the appeal costs, yes.
And then a really good question, I think, related to context. Did the events at Charlottesville, in your mind, or if you know locally there, right, and the Charlottesville protests impact the litigation that was happening in Memphis, or the sentiments from the city and their efforts to remove the statutes?
Mike, probably not, because this is Memphis. Memphis is 2/3 African American, okay? And Memphis is deeply acquainted with the phenomena and the attitudes that were brought to light in the Charlottesville events. Charlottesville is a very different community, and I lived in Charlottesville for 10 years. It's where I got my PhD, and I taught on the faculty of the medical school there for 4 years before I moved to Memphis. And it is a predominantly majority community. It's very different from Memphis.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your energy and the information that you shared with us. This is a fascinating story, I think critical for lawyers to be mindful of as we think of ways to resolve conflicts in our communities. And I know that there are lots of people looking for the CLE code. It will, yep, there it is. It's in the chat. If you're interested in the CLE, the link to that is available. And thank you so much, Dr. Morheim. I really, really appreciate you being with us today.
And I, if I may please, offer my thanks to you, to Dean Berg, to Calvin Sharp. I am so honored to have been invited to do this lecture. And I cannot tell you how tickled I was to pursue this topic, because as I said, I was just gobsmacked watching the TV that evening. And as I heard more about how this got done, what I thought of at the time was, oh my gosh, this is brilliant lawyering. I mean, it takes somebody like me to think, oh my gosh, these guys did an amazing thing. And it was all very quiet, building block by building block by building block. They got it done very quietly and completely successfully. And as Jim Strickland promised, totally legally. Yeah. Completely legally. And so I was just tickled to trace this whole thing out. So I thank you so kindly for your invitation.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. That's all we have time for today. Be well.